Schoolmates didn't really, used to add the odd joke, how did you fit in a test tube? Because back then it was test tube baby. Mm-hmm. And I used to say to them, don't be stupid, a test tube wasn't even used, it was a petri dish. And they used to go, what's that? And I just used to say, oh, it's a little round dish. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, why is it called a test tube baby then? And I said, I don't actually know.
On July 25th, 1978, the world of family building changed forever. On this day in Manchester, United Kingdom, Louise Brown gave birth to a baby girl conceived through in vitro fertilization. This event sparked hope and controversy throughout the world. 40 plus years later and over 10 million babies born worldwide with this technology, the debates continue. Author, public speaker, and fertility treatment advocate here to talk about growing up as the first IVF baby. Welcome to Baby or Bust, Louise Joy Brown.
Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here.
Such an honor, Louise. I really, really appreciate this opportunity. I have heard about you, it feels like my whole life, whether it was middle school science class or just all my training in obstetrics, gynecology, fertility. Your birth has come up with a lot of learning. And I'm curious, when did you first realize that you were the first IVF baby?
From quite a very young age. I started school with our school years in England. Being born in July, I was always the youngest in the year. I started school, I was just 4. I was 4 in the July and then I started in the September. So mum and dad sat me down, just tried to explain that I was born in a slightly different way to everybody else. They showed the video of my birth, which everybody can view on YouTube. Quite a gruesome birth. Mum had a cesarean section, so they pulled me out, bawling my eyes out.
Something to see it for. Oh my goodness.
And they just basically said that Patrick Steptoe and Robert Edwards helped mum and dad have me. And that was really sort of it. They didn't go into any details because I wouldn't have understood it for. I think they just wanted to make me aware because obviously all the other children that I went to school with were going to be aware, just to sort of give me a heads up and make it as normal as possible.
Do you remember your friends and schoolmates bringing it up or talking to you about it?
They were inquisitive like I was. The only thing was I used to sit there and listen to mum and dad be interviewed. So I'd pick up most of the stuff that I learned as I was growing up. I picked up from interviews. If I had any questions to ask mum and dad, I could have asked them, but I didn't really need to because I just used to sit and listen to the interviews, which was quite handy. Schoolmates didn't really, used to add the odd joke, how did you fit in a test tube? Because back then it was test tube baby. Mm-hmm. And I used to say to them, don't be stupid, a test tube wasn't even used, it was a petri dish. And they used to go, what's that? And I just used to say, oh, it's a little round dish. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, why is it called a test tube baby then? And I said, I don't actually know.
And you did share in your book, it was made up by a journalist. Just yes. It sounded pretty catchy and it was just part of the media kind of headlines that were around. I just know children can often be unforgiving or even a little bit mean about teasing if anybody is different. And I was just curious if that was ever a part of your growing up.
No, I was lucky. The odd child might have said something, but nothing that stuck in, that scarred me or anything.
Do you remember as a child ever seeing news about you or, reading the newspaper or a headline and being like, oh my gosh, they're talking about me?
From the day I was born, mum kept a scrapbook of every single newspaper article that she could get her hands on that involved us or me or like the family. I think I just thought it was the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. My friends were exactly the same, if you know what I mean. I think that's what I thought in my head. It wasn't till I got to my teenage years when you start understanding a little bit more that you think, oh yeah, it is slightly different. And then looking at the media whirlwind that there was, realising how special it was.
It's pretty interesting. It's now over 10 million babies have been born worldwide with IVF, including my family. So I not only am a fertility doctor and help people do IVF to build their own families, but I actually did IVF. And I always remember my grandmother grew up on a tobacco farm in Kentucky, rural United States. Every time there was an article, sometimes they were about you or just something advancing in the world of fertility, she would say, I wish this was available to me. Because when she was trying, almost 20 years, Louise, almost 20 years my grandmother was trying. Finally, I'm here. So finally had my dad when she was 37 and all her friends were having grandbabies. She always said, oh my gosh, if this was available, I would have taken advantage of this opportunity. Reading your book and what your parents really dealt with, even just in your mom's pregnancy, the lengths that journalists would go to try to get pictures of her or pictures of you. That one journalist that set the fire alarm in the hospital when she was there, my goodness.
I know, it's scary to think that they'd go to that length. As it was, they didn't get a picture of Mum because Mum was taken out a back way. And I think they had in the hospital, they had tunnels. So they went out through a tunnel. So they still didn't get a picture of Mum that time. So
yeah.
I think that was Brown's 1, journalist 0.
It's wonderful, I think, and forward thinking that they were just open with you from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think Mum and Dad had a choice, really.
Good point.
It was worldwide. So, I mean, I'm glad they did share everything because it's part of who I am, if you know what I mean. And if I didn't know and grow up with it all, perhaps I wouldn't be doing this today.
Dr. Steptoe gave you your middle name.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Joy.
And,
yeah.
And why did he name you that?
Well, he hoped it would create joy to other couples, other thousands of couples, which his wish came true.
Absolutely. And tell me a little bit about your parents' journey to become the first parents of an IVF baby.
My dad was married before he met my mum and had 2 children. So I had 2 older sisters. Dad met Mum and then they got together. My mum took on one of my older sisters and the other one got adopted out because back in the 60s, men didn't have children on their own. Then they were together for about 10 years trying to get pregnant and nothing was happening. So Mum made a GP appointment and they discovered that she had depression. So, and they put that down to her trying to get pregnant for the 9 years. They referred her to Central Health Clinic in Bristol, where we live. And she had a gynecologist there, Dr. Hinton. Mum had gone to an appointment there and said, there's 1 in a million chance that you'll have a baby. She said, but there is some work that a gynecologist is doing up in Oldham. It looks like he may be able to help you. I'll write him a letter and see if he'll have a meeting with you. So they travelled the 400 miles from Bristol to Oldham to have this meeting with Patrick Steptoe.
Amazing.
Which he accepted them onto the programme. I'm pretty sure they told Mum that it hadn't worked before, but all Mum could see was that they were going to help Mum have a baby. So she had to have her fallopian tubes removed because they were damaged. Not sure how, but they'd been damaged. Mum and Dad didn't have any money. So I think this was part of the why Patrick chose Mum and Dad to go on the programme, because they were quite poor. They used to sleep rough in railway carriages in Bristol. Didn't sort of have a lot of money. Dad luckily won £500 on the football pools, which enabled Mum to have the operation to remove her fallopian tubes. Then she could start the treatment with Patrick and Bob.
Incredible.
So I think they retrieved 1 egg. And because Mum didn't have any injections, I mean, now you can have injections to stimulate the eggs and everything and get more eggs, but Mum literally 1 egg and my dad's sperm. When I look back now, I think the amount of things that could have gone wrong, but it just all seemed to go right at the right time.
You felt that your mom didn't really even realize that she was the first one to kind of be pregnant and go on with the pregnancy.
Yeah, not till about, I don't think she realised till she was about 6 months pregnant. And then from 6 months, they kept her up in Oldham, obviously to keep her safe and to keep an eye on her. Mum always said to me, the moment she met Patrick Steptoe, she trusted him. There was just something about him. She just trusted him. And like I said, they probably did tell her that it was an experiment at the time and it hadn't worked. But I don't think she took any notice. She just thought these two men are going to help me have a baby or help us have a baby. Very special.
I'm wondering, did your mom ever talk to you about if she was worried when you were born? I mean, nobody knew. Well, they didn't even have abdominal ultrasounds at that point.
No.
Like, they had no idea.
It's quite funny you say that because they were examining Mum not long before I was born. And Patrick always referred to my mum as Leslie. He never referred to her as she, her, or anything. There must have been some sort of scan, but not what my mum could see. And he was saying to the person he was talking to, she's fine. So my mum had an inkling in the beginning, well, like when they'd done that I was a girl. But other than that, she didn't know. You couldn't tell if I had one leg, two arms. You couldn't tell anything.
Yeah.
So until that moment that they lifted me out, I suppose it was must have been quite scary and nerve-wracking for them as well.
And then after you were born, I remember you were talking about how you were just whisked off, right, for all of these tests.
Yeah, Mum having the C-section, she was put out, so she hadn't even realised I'd been born. Not until the next day when she'd woken up and everything. I think it was dinner time on the 26th. So they whisked me away. They did about 100 tests to make sure that I was all okay. They even took my fingerprints. And the reason I know that, because Mum made a complaint. When she finally did wake up and held me for the first time, she looked on my fingers and I had black ink all around my nails. And she said, why's my baby got black ink on her nails? And they said, we've taken her fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And my mum said, well, why have you taken her fingerprints? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, that was one of the tests we did. So whether they thought I wouldn't have fingerprints, I'm not sure. But Mum was quite upset about that. She did actually say to me that I felt I had to share you with the world, whereas Natalie was hers. If that makes sense.
I hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Natalie was the 40th, so she had her in Bristol. It wasn't in the papers. It was a lot more low key. So she didn't have to share her with the world, whereas she had to share me.
Oh, I didn't realize that your sister was number 40. So between you and your sister, there were 39 other babies born.
Yes.
Wow.
And I know two of them. Alistair, which is the Scottish one that was born 6 months after me, January 79. And obviously I know Elizabeth Carr.
Yes, the first baby born in the U.S. from IVF. Yeah. That's right, Elizabeth Carr. You mentioned a little bit this balance between the chance that it happened to be you and your parents first versus what was meant to be was meant to be. And that must be a lot to kind of wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's very strange. And actually, I was talking to Grace. I call her Auntie Grace, but Grace is the mother of Alistair II.
Did they do tests on you later, like when you were a child, behavioral tests or physical exams or anything like that?
I've had nothing since the day I was born.
Were you ever worried about being normal? And I say that in air quotes.
No, not really.
Awesome.
I was just the same as my friends growing up. The only difference was I had the added pressure of the press. That was the only thing that was different. I think Mum and Dad did a brilliant thing of bringing me and my sister up. They wanted to keep it as normal as possible. Between when I started school at 4 and about 10, we did hardly any interviews because we'd done all the traveling before I started school. Like they did a book tour of the States.
Did you talk to your parents about it at home? Kind of a little bit of their story and...
Not really. I think we just literally led. Although I was born with IVF, we just sort of led a normal life and got on with normal everyday things. We did receive a couple of items of hate mail when I was younger. You would have probably seen the picture in the book. It was a little test tube with a fetus in it, and like I think it was red ink that was supposed to be blood, and it just said to Mum, that was when Mum first came home from hospital with me, just said they were going to come and find us. They never did. It was just more weird stuff.
It's so polarizing, and I still find this today as in my efforts to try to be an advocate for IVF. When you were born, you talked about having incredible amounts of mail, and so many of them were full of hope, and other couples from around the world and women who have been trying for so long to have their baby, and your birth, you know, just inspired such hope that there are options out there. And then just really negative things like that. You're talking about the parcel from San Francisco with the broken test tube, and that you're just kind of messing with nature and just trying to navigate. It's incredibly polarizing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the good outweighed the bad by millions. Mum put all the cards into a scrapbook, which actually I've, when Mum passed away, we had to clear the house out. And I've actually donated it all to the local museum in Bristol. So they've preserved it and they've got it so people can go and look at it, and anybody doing research can see it. It even consists of the letter from Bob Edwards telling Mum that she's in early stages of pregnancy. So that's all been preserved and everything as well. So
just incredible piece of history. Did you ever worry about your own fertility?
No. People, when I was growing up, reporters and that would always ask me. When I got to about 14, that would be one of the questions that everybody would ask me. And I was like, no, I'm not. If I need IVF, I'll use it. But if I don't, then I won't. It wasn't something that I worried about. As it was, it took me 2.5 years to get pregnant. But I think that was just my system. When we were at school, drummed into you, don't get pregnant, be on the pill injection, be on the pill, don't get pregnant. I used to have the pill injection. So when I got married, I came off of it. And it took me 2.5 years to get pregnant. But I didn't sort of feel that it was because of how I was born or anything. I think that was just my system. And then there's 6.5 years between my two sons. So we decided we were going to give it another try. And again, I'd gone back on the pill injection, and it took me 2.5 years. So I think that was just my system and how it worked.
Did it help at all that your sister had a baby before you? Because, you know, she was born from IVF but didn't have trouble conceiving on her own.
She was actually the first IVF baby to have a baby of her own, naturally. We knew, obviously by then, I knew that she was fine. So I suppose I just didn't enter my mind. I didn't let it bother me.
When did you talk to your sons about your IVF history, and how did that come up?
Cameron, as I said, he's 15, so he will be leaving school this year, which is pretty scary. The fact that I've got a teenage son, and it's just scary.
It is. But I have a 15-year-old daughter. I'm right there with you. I hear you.
Yeah. Although I think I'd be worse if he was a daughter, I think, because it's girls. He obviously realised things were a bit different when I have photographs done. When Cameron was little, we used to go out there for they used to have a party sort of once a year or every couple of years on my birthday. So he used to get photographed, which he didn't like his picture being taken. And then when he got a bit older, I said to him basically what Mum and Dad said to me. Patrick and Bob helped Nanny have me. And then he's learned the rest through sex education at school. Much to his disgust, he was doing science a couple of weeks ago, and they were learning about it in science. Because now in schools, they actually cover the IVF subject. There was a picture of me and him in his science book.
Oh my gosh.
When I was in senior school, which is your high school, they just started covering about IVF. So there was a picture of me as a baby in my science book. But Cameron was most unhappy the fact that there was a picture of me and him.
It's totally different world bringing up kids now than in the 70s, because I actually have a book for my kids called It's Not the Stork that kind of talks a lot about puberty and sex ed. And there's a page in there about an IVF doctor. And there's like a little picture of a doctor. And I'm like, hey, this is like mommy, because, I'm an IVF doctor.
Yeah.
And so since my son was really young, I was like, yeah, this is how we had you. Just this weekend, I was talking to him and I just sort of said, hey, I'm really excited about this interview that I'm doing. On Monday, I get to talk to Louise Brown. I've heard about her my whole life, told him a little bit about you. And I was just like, isn't that amazing that, she's the first person that was born in a way that you were? And he's like, what do you mean? So he'd actually forgotten that he was an IVF baby. And he was like, oh, that's kind of weird. You mean science? You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah. And then he's like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, how does that make you feel? He's like, whatever. And maybe that's just like a 12-year-old boy. But the way that a lot of my patients have talked about and the way that I've talked about it with my kids is look at how much mommy and daddy wanted you, right? Like we worked so hard to bring you into this world and, in a positive way. And you felt that experience. You've learned your parents' story and their journey, and that's kind of a unique way to be able to talk to your kids about that.
Yeah, definitely. People, sometimes I get asked, like, should I tell my children that they're IVF or donor conception or all the different things that there are now? I said I personally would, because I think it's important for them as well as you. And then you can just talk about it openly. And again, this is what I try to raise awareness about, is there's a lot of people that won't talk about it. There's still a lot of stigma. I am going around the world, different countries. We went to Bulgaria at one point and they just wouldn't talk about it. The men, definitely not. It was just a really taboo subject. And my first visit to Bulgaria when mum was alive, we went with mum, and it enabled the government to fund IVF over there.
Wow.
Which was amazing, because that's what it's all about. I mean, it's so expensive, and the things I hold on to is I know Bob and Patrick chose mum and dad because of their poor background. I'm 100% sure of that, because they wanted it for everybody to use. And this is part of the message I like to get across, is they wanted it for everybody, not just for the rich people that could afford it. So it's just trying to get a balance, because obviously it's different over in the States. You've got healthcare, whereas here we've got NHS. But I think it's the same, like some NHS, you can get some on the NHS. In some places you can't.
No, you and I are fighting for the same thing. So in the United States, only 19 states out of 50 have any mandated coverage for fertility testing and benefits. And even then, sometimes employers, most people in the U.S. get their medical insurance from their employer, not from the government. And it is just vastly different on who has coverage or not. And so we are working really hard to increase coverage. Where do you find that sense of responsibility? I mean, you honestly could just, shut the door and live your life and not put yourself out there. And where does that sense come from?
From when I was born, I'm the only one left in the room that can do it. And people seem to listen. So I just feel that that's what I'm giving back, if that makes sense. That's my sort of thing to the world.
Yes, absolutely. Would you envision a day where anybody that needed to have fertility treatment could?
I mean, mum's procedure was relatively simple. It was what they call a natural cycle. But now, obviously, you have injections to stimulate more eggs. You can freeze eggs. There's so many different things you can do.
Absolutely.
Surrogacy. Although I'm in the field, I'm not in the field. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I just read the newspapers, read articles when they come out. I always get asked my opinion, but I would love to think that in 20 years' time, people that just needed access to it could get it. Going back to when mum had the treatment for me, there wasn't any of this. There wasn't coverage on the news, or there wasn't books to read, or people she could talk to that would listen and know the answers, or there was nothing. I mean, it's 100% better from when it first started, but we still need to push it.
I totally agree. Your birth was very polarizing, right? There's, hope versus controversy. And you were born exactly 10 years to the day after the publication of Human Life, Humanitae Vitae by the Catholic Church, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is a document that was written by Pope Paul VI in sort of a reaction to contraceptions, the swinging 60s and the birth control pill and, free love and all that kind of stuff. And that document, again, July 25th, 1968, was saying like, hey, that is not in God's plan, using contraception and sort of getting in the way of the natural processes of family building is just not okay with the Catholic Church. And there are some people out there that think it's very interesting coincidence that you were born exactly 10 years later on July 25th, 1978. And I was just wondering if anyone has ever asked you about that, or kind of there's another conspiracy theory out there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, nobody's never mentioned that. So that might have just been just a freaky coincidence.
It was beautiful, even though Pope Paul VI passed away, a few days after you were born. John Paul I came out and said basically, like, don't hold your parents in a negative light because all they wanted to do was build a family. Like, we're still trying to figure out the science, and we need to be very thoughtful about what we're doing and think about things. And just because in science, just because you can do something like genetic manipulation doesn't mean that you should. And I just thought that was a really beautiful way of being very kind, leading with kindness, like being kind to your parents, but also saying like, okay, like, don't throw off the reins of IVF. Like, we still need to kind of think about things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Obviously, he was in a bit of a place as well, wasn't he? Because obviously all the followings the Pope's got, it was just a bit of sort of, I think they handled it very well.
Absolutely. Do you ever get questioned about that, about your faith or sort of the mixing between science and religion?
Not really, no.
Yeah,
no,
just leave it to me.
Yeah.
I think it's just fascinating. I really do. Yeah. All the work that you're doing is shattering stigma, being out there, sharing your story, and advocating for people who really need this care to have access to it. And so I appreciate so much everything that you're doing. This is truly a dream come true, Louise. I cannot thank you enough.
I just find it wonderful because without people like you, there wouldn't be any hope, would there? You've carried all the work on that Bob and Patrick and Jean started, but without all the embryologists, gynecologists, specialists, it wouldn't carry on. So it's amazing to think that it all sort of started with mum and dad, and nearly 45 years later, we're at a point where we are. I mean, it still vastly needs to improve. I just get flashbacks sometimes, and I remember when mum was close to passing away, she actually said to me, she said, without Patrick, Bob and Jean, she wouldn't have had me, she wouldn't have had the grandchildren, she wouldn't have had son-in-laws. It's basically not just having a baby, it's creating families. So, and without those three special people, it wouldn't have happened.
And the bravery of your parents, truly.
Yeah. Because mum, I mean, she always said in the beginning, if somebody would tell her she'd get pregnant, she'd go and stand on her head naked in Trafalgar Square. If that would help get pregnant. Do you know what I mean? She was so desperate she would have done anything. And my mum was quite a quiet, shy lady. And the things she went through, she's just amazing.
Absolutely. And I do know what you're talking about because my grandmother talked about that all growing up. If she had to do a handstand in the middle of Trafalgar Square to get pregnant, she would have done it too.
Yeah.
Incredible. Oh, Louise, thank you so much. So where can we find you if we want to learn more about you and connect with you?
I've got a website. So my website's www.louisejoybrown.co.uk. I've got a Facebook page. I've got Twitter. I've got Instagram, all under Louise Joy Brown. Anybody wants to send me an email, I've got an email address, which is on my website. Lots of different ways to contact me.
Fantastic. And then your book, which just had a second edition. And I didn't realize there was a second edition, an updated version. I'm excited to read updated version?
The updated version, basically all the mad things that happened on my 40th year. So all the travels I did and things like that is all, and some updated pictures is all in there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Louise. I really appreciate your coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
That was absolutely incredible. It is not many times that you get to speak to someone that you've heard about your entire life. And Louise Brown is just an inspiration and just an incredibly humble and kind person. And really just makes me think about the importance of sharing stories, you know, whether it is your fertility journey, your use of IVF, your miscarriage experience. You know, other people can learn so much from us sharing, and she has turned her experience into a way to advocate for others. And I think that that is a truly inspirational thing to take away from today. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. If you like this episode, let us know. Give us a 5-star review and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Baby or Bust is produced by Mark Ramsey, Jamie Solis, and Greg Moga. Executive produced by Paul Anderson for Workhouse Media. Baby or Bust is a Mark Ramsey media production.